Blimey. Ooh, this is one out of a jam jar you got here.
The House of Mystery contains demons, angels, elementals, magicians, wizards, apparitions, adult language, and discussions. If you're easily offended, do not enter the House of Mystery.
All right, then. On with the show.
All right, hello, welcome everyone. It feels good to be back in the House of Mystery. I am Michael, your curator and guide through the House of Horrors, and in the House of Mystery with me is the one and only demon bisexual butler, David Sabal.
Hello, everybody.
All right, David, so we have a very fun topic to get through today, and that is James Gunn's creature Commandos.
Dude, I'm so happy how this thing turned out. I had so much anticipation for this to see what Gunn's opening volley for Gods and Monsters, his arc, is going to be.
Yeah.
And I have to say, he did set the tone really well.
Yeah, David, I would agree with that. In some ways, you can say James Gunn's new DC universe feels awfully familiar, but not awful, which is something we would all, I would assume, would have expected when you're dealing with an auteur like James Gunn, someone who imposes his style very distinctly and overtly on his work. Of course he's going to bring his aesthetic, his style, his form. So that's to be expected. Also, because not only is it his style, but the way he writes these types of projects do in fact work. Now, yes, I would agree largely that Creature Commandos is an accomplishment. It's a good start, but that does not mean, David, that we are now in the clear. We need to see what more he has planned before we can rest easy, because as DC fans, Dave, we have been jaded, we have been stabbed in the back, we have been chastised. Well, pretty much everything that you can possibly do to a DC fan, we have been
Abused.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the best way of saying it. Now, Creature Commandos, David, as you had mentioned, serves as the first step in James Gunn's reimagined DC universe by setting the tone for his broader vision, which was really the point of this animation. Focusing on character-driven storytelling, a balance of humor and emotional depth, which is a James Gunn specialty, and the integration of both familiar and unconventional elements into the DC landscape. I don't want to get stuck trying to weave through all of the toxic commentary that is still very much a part of DC, but it must be addressed at some point, David, because even though this is a verified success, you would not think it is so if you were to go to social media and listen to the Snyder Bros.
Oh, my God.
Now,
Yeah.
Just because it has to be discussed, unfortunately, in this day and age, I'm a Snyder fan. Like, I like what... Well,
After
I
Rebel
don't
Moon?
know if I'm a Snyder fan. I was a fan of Snyder's work on DC. I liked Man of Steel.
Okay.
I loved Batman vs. Superman, and I enjoyed his cut of Justice League Dark. But the jig is up. He's not here with us any longer, and he hasn't been for nearly a decade.
Yes.
Okay, you're about, 2 years shy of a decade that he hasn't really been a part of DC, and we still have people talking about Snyder as if he's going to come in and fix things, and James Gunn is this evil meanie bobini that disrupted Zack Snyder's plans. James Gunn had nothing to do with any of that. James Gunn is coming in to pick up the pieces because of Snyder's firing.
Yes.
Like, he had nothing to do with the firing. His hiring is separated by, 4 years?
Yeah.
Roughly? So that being said, if you have not given Creature Commandos a shot yet, because either A, you've heard all of the backlash on social media and you can't really decipher what the truth is of the matter, or you're just not into cartoons, right?
Yeah.
Well, give it a shot. And I'm hoping through the course of this discussion, we'll win you over if you haven't had an opportunity to watch the series.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, it's nothing against what Zack Snyder did for DC. At the end of the day, Warner Brothers decided to go with a different filmmaker. That's what it ultimately came down to.
And also, the Warner Brothers management that chose to go a different direction is also not the management that fired Snyder. That's also twice removed. So anyone that's currently involved with what's happening in DC, we're not around when Snyder was in charge.
Yeah, this is a brand new regime in Warner Brothers. And yeah, everyone basically constantly says, well, it's Warner Brothers. They're going to screw it up somehow. And I'm like going, yeah, but let's give the benefit of the doubt that there's new leadership now on WB. And let's see what they did, because for one thing, at least they actually saw James Gunn and said, well, let's see. We know he did well for our rivals in Marvel. We also know he did arguably give us one of the better DC films in the mix of this transition with Suicide Squad.
I mean, that's subjective, David, but I guess a better way of saying that, because I agree, but I would say a better way of possibly saying that is critically. Critically, all of James Gunn's DC work has also been received favorably.
Yeah. And if you think about Zack Snyder, unfortunately, his trajectory fell like a rock after he left DC, because he then went to do Rebel Moon.
Oh, you're talking about Snyder?
Yeah, Snyder. And his trajectory fell off the cliff.
Yeah.
And they're people that are now looking, hopefully, who are smart up in the leadership of Warner Brothers now, are looking at going, okay, so we have this one filmmaker who his trajectory, it went down, but this guy's trajectory is going up. Yeah. Let's go with the guy who has the better trajectory.
Yeah. Yeah, it just makes more sense. There's also just a lot of baggage surrounding Snyder at this point. I feel like it's almost impossible to separate all the negativity from Snyder, at least when it comes to his relation to DC. And unfortunately, none of this was exacerbated by Snyder himself.
Yeah.
It's the fan base, which I was with the fan base originally.
Yeah.
Like, I was like, yeah, release a Snyder cut. If it's there and we have all this footage, then yes, let's see this. I was all about that. But now that we know it's not a thing anymore, like, it's over, we have to move on. We can't continue to dig our heels in the ground and demand Snyder films, because it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
It's just not, especially after it was revealed that a lot of the release of Snyder Cut tweets and the viral nature of that campaign was actually amplified by bots.
Yes.
So there's a lot of reasons why going back to Snyder isn't going to serve DC well, unfortunately, because I did like Snyder's vision. I loved him. I love the fact that he was embracing the Greek and Roman aspects of the DC fan base, the gods, the supreme, the sovereignty of these creatures, which is very different than Marvel. He understood that aspect of DC, and I do like that. But we'll see what James Gunn has in store. And as I said, bringing it right back to Creature Commandos, since we're talking about initial phases and first steps and James Gunn's new direction, Creature Commandos serves as that. In the expansive world of the cinematic universe, where stakes often rise to epic proportions and the narrative web grows increasingly complex, this is where James Gunn's Creative Commandos feels like a breath of fresh air.
Yeah.
The 7-episode series, which is just too short, that's my negative right there, it serves as the first piece in Gunn's newly overhauled DC universe. It manages to stand out by embracing simplicity.
Yes.
What do I always say about simplicity? When you hear the word simple or simplicity, you often think garbage. It's not complex. I don't want I don't want to pay attention to this, but I always say there's a genius to simplicity if it can be done correctly. There are tons of TV shows, Person of Interest, How to Get Away with Murder, that are very simple concepts, very simple shows that then become complex because of its way of handling the simplicity of the content itself.
Yeah.
So you have the simplicity in a genre typically associated with grandiosity. So rather than overwhelming the viewer with convoluted lore, which happens a lot in comic book films or global scale crisis, Gunn actually delivers a more personal, character-driven narrative, and it's not about saving the world. It's about saving the misunderstood, the
Yes.
monstrous, and the outcast, which is really the thematics that underlines the entire run of the narrative.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I found really, really amazing about this series, because just like what you said, seven episodes, this series feels by the end of it, it should have gotten more play.
Well, we were barely getting into like, oh, this is good, and then
This
it's
is good.
over.
And then but when you actually look what Gunn was able to do with an ensemble cast and all these different characters and able to actually give them definitive character development and character origins without doing the stereotypical thing in all superhero genre where we have to spend the entire movie talking about the character's origin.
Yeah.
Instead, he makes the origin part of the story. Like all of their character development ties into, the flow of the overall story arc. You have the reason why the bride is the way she is and it plays into the story. Same thing with every single character. Every single character is like, probably when they do the origins, it's probably only about 3 to 5 minutes long.
Yeah.
But man, there's a lot going on in those 3 to 5 minutes, and it doesn't just stop. It carries the narrative forward.
Yeah, and I'm okay with that because I don't really view these aspects of origin as flashbacks. I'm not a fan of flashbacks, but I am a fan of nonlinear storytelling. If you're able to do it, not everybody can handle nonlinear narratives.
And it works a little better in animation style than in live action.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Because you have this almost grandiose flair about it when I real truly feel like I was reading a comic book when I was watching this series, because it was you would have the moments with each character and then all of a sudden you'd have this brief, almost kind of narration point of, oh, this is what happened in the character's past. And then boom, you're back. You turn the page and they're back in the story. And that's what I really liked about Gunn's attempt with Creature Commandos. It felt like it was a comic book, which I'm sorry.
It felt like a comic book, but also felt sincere to comic book roots, but also it was something entirely different as well.
Mm-hmm.
But he didn't shun from the comic book isms, I guess is a good way of saying that. And when you look at the themes, David, that ultimately is what's going to build how you delve into the thematics is really what's going to dictate whether your simplistic route that you're taking, your simplistic strategy is going to work. How are you going to take those underlining themes and make them connect with the viewer? And to me, the way they told this story seems like a logical and natural way to solidify a connection between the viewer and the fictional lives and experiences of these characters. And I think many of us at times, when you look at some of these themes, we feel isolated and misunderstood, like we might be outcasts.
Yeah.
And dare I say, monstrous at times. These are very real things that people go through, people that you may not even realize have these types of issues. A lot of these problems aren't necessarily insecurity issues or self-esteem issues. They're the ways that society has made us feel about ourselves. That's why one of Sartre's best sayings, hell is other people, meaning the look that we capture from people is what shapes us, which keeps us filled and trapped within ourselves. You know, oftentimes the way people view us shape our own identity. So these are things that we do in fact feel because of our interactions with the real world. And that's really what this series just really capitalizes on. It's the symptomatic meaning, what's really being said. So yes, you have the goriness, you have the fun aspects that's going to attract the mainstream audience, but then you have the intellectual within the silly, within the simple. And I was hoping that James Gunn brought that aspect, because most of his work, I'm not saying he's overly intellectual. What I'm saying is that he's very careful with how he connects themes with his narrative and making sure it meshes to say something about the individual.
Yeah. And I like the fact that basically he was able to do that. Now, this is, in my opinion, the way he actually was able to do that was to make the story connect with, to have that centralized character that kind of all the other characters rally about, and that was Nina, the basically the fish girl in the aqua suit.
Oh yeah.
And having her be kind of like the centralized point for all these characters and overall be the motivation of these characters.
Yeah.
Was like, that's the strength of James Gunn's writing when he's doing stuff like this, where he's able to do the flash and the pomp and the circumstance to get the mass audiences in, but to also bring in those more intellectually starved viewers who want something more deep with their storytelling by creating these intricate narrative character developments.
Yeah.
Because look what he did in Guardians of the Galaxy. He was able to do that with Rocket, who's technically not a main character
In that third film. Well,
in that third
he,
film.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's kind of like,
Well, that's a good example, David, because, okay, so Rocket was the emotional weight in a lot of ways. Peter Quill had his own emotional storyline, but he's the driving force of the narrative itself. And you can look at Creature Commandos. If you're looking at James Gunn's style and approach to writing, you can look at Creature Commandos in almost the same way, because even though Nina is perhaps the major emotional connective tissue in this whole entire story, I would say she's more the human component that kind of brings all of them together under one she helps articulate the group, but the driving force of the narrative and the leader at the center is probably, I would assume, or I would say, is the bride.
the bride. It's the bride.
The bride. So when you look at how he juggles this back and forth with his characters, and it's all because his focus is not on spectacle. His focus is on character, and the character-driven approach, in contrast to many other superhero series or even films where world building takes center stage, Creature Commandos prioritizes its characters.
Yes.
And this is something we've seen in pretty much all of Gunn's work, even in his schlocky, though I love it immensely, B-film Sliver.
Yes.
Another ensemble cast
Another
there.
ensemble cast.
You could say a lot of things about that movie, but it is very much character-driven. There are a lot of moving components that help relay the story itself. So by assembling a team in Creature Commandos of literal monsters, Gunn plays with established gothic horror tropes, reimagining them for modern audiences while also honoring their storied legacies, which is what I would always say, or I should say, I always say is the best way of doing things. You want to honor legacies. You don't need to regurgitate the things we've seen. Honor them. Pay homage. Be respectful. And that's exactly something that we get in this. They're playing with all of the intricacies, the various conventions of the gothic horror. There are also other genres of horror that find itself in Creature Commandos, but I would say the predominant genre conventions that are utilized are in fact the gothic.
Yeah. Well, especially with like
Well, the bride. Look at the way the series opened.
began.
I mean, the first 2 episodes itself sets the tone for the entire series moving forward.
Yeah. And without giving away any spoilers, because this is actually a series that I do not want to give spoilers, because I want our listeners to actually go check out Creature Commandos, because it deserves to be watched. But like, without giving too many spoilers, in those first 2 episodes, Gunn was able, I was really worried that Gunn would do what I think what I call Gunnisms, where if you watch Suicide Squad, I was worried that Suicide Squad was Creature Commandos was going to be treated just like Suicide Squad.
Yeah.
And in the first 2 episodes, I was proven wrong, because it shows that Gunn really wants to put his stamp on this IP and say, no, I am trying to give you a story. It goes back to, like, me and you talked about it in one of our other shows for covering DC, is like, James Gunn has stated, if there's no story, he's not going to do it. And here, I'm glad that he proved me wrong, because in the first 2 episodes, he proved there was a story that he was going to kind of bring center stage with this.
Yeah.
It wasn't just going to be like the Suicide Squad, in my opinion, where it's like, okay, I'm going to throw all these characters in there and I'm going to make this all like crazy and wacky and everything. No, he actually stuck to his guns, as funny as it sounds, and said, no, I'm truly trying to actually bring storytelling back to DC.
To me, David, this is better than Suicide Squad. And that could be okay. I'm not sure. Maybe it's because we're both more aligned with the horror and the darker side of DC. But I would say the way he wades into this series, there's more knowledge in what he's using.
Mm-hmm.
The literary legacy, like the Gothic, that he's utilizing, as well as other various horror genres, he's using them in ways that I don't feel like he was able to do in the Suicide Squad.
Yeah.
Not to say that Suicide Squad is a horror, because it's not, but even the inspirations that he used, they're just not as robust. They're not as common.
There you go. Yeah.
As the horror. We understand horror, and I think there's an understanding there that the moment we're introduced to the bride, we understand that this is a story about autonomy, identity. And trauma by the way it starts out, and you're using those Gothic sensibilities to bring that forward.
And bringing that trauma to each and every character too. That element of trauma. That's the thing that I think was missing, honestly, in Suicide Squad. That you kind of got to see, like, oh, each of these characters in Suicide Squad had like their own different trauma, but he never really dived head into it like he does here. And in doing so, when he dived into here, with especially with the Gothic elements and adding that, it brings that theme of character development and character trauma. Let's change it from character development to character trauma, front and center. And it's like, I like the fact that basically I feel more attached to these characters than I do Suicide Squad.
Yeah, I would agree, David, because I think there's something to be said about broken individuals, like truly broken. And I got to be careful, because you could even say the same thing about the Suicide Squad. You're dealing with broken individuals, but the agenda or the philosophical project that's aligned with the Suicide Squad is very different than the one that's aligned with the Creature Commandos, because you're dealing here with the reality of a fractured existence.
Yeah.
In the midst of a world that doesn't really fully accept these people. So when you're dealing with a fractured existence, you're also dealing with what? Isolation, belonging, othering, which also happens when you are on the other side of belonging. So the series explores that tension between wanting to belong and the realization that perhaps by nature, you will always be an outsider.
You'll always be an outsider.
Which is a dark premise, but isn't that the nature of the Gothic? Because
Yes.
in this very aspect, Creature Commandos mirrors those Gothic traditions where characters find themselves trapped in a liminal space, straddling the worlds of the living and the dead, humanity and monstrosity. That's the contrast right there.
Well, also in the idea of it is with the Gothic is like in Gothic, your villains aren't necessarily villains. And that's the difference between Creature Commandos and Suicide Squad.
Yeah.
Suicide Squad, they're just a bunch of villains and assholes who deserve what they
These
have
people,
coming.
yeah, these people are victims.
These people
victims
are
of life. Yes.
But they're just like what you said, outsiders. And because they're deemed outsiders, they're deemed monsters. Hence the term why they consider them villains when they're not. They're just villains by circumstance, I guess you can say.
Well, this is also the area that's very common with the James Gunn, I guess you can say. He did something that Marvel, and this to me is the reason why James Gunn is the only director, and this is me not blowing James Gunn. James Gunn is not my favorite director. He's not even my favorite Marvel director, but you can still, without him being your favorite, can still admit where his strengths lie.
Yeah.
He manages to break with the absoluteness of good versus evil, the duality, which is what a lot of the standard comic book fare is aligned with.
Yes.
You have the good and you have the evil. If you look at Guardians of the Galaxy, especially moving into the second film as well as the third film, you're dealing with people who are very dark, very broken, and possibly morally ambiguous at times. But that's the world James Gunn occupies, moral ambiguity. And that's the same here with Creature Commandos and the nature of the team itself, Task Force M. You have a group of morally ambiguous characters. They're not clearly defined in easy puritanical type of ethics.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another thing that really works because you have more wiggle room. When you're dealing with a morally ambiguous world, you have a lot more ability to move around and pose certain questions that you might want to pose to audiences, like with Dr. Phosphorus.
I'm glad you brought him up because like Dr. Phosphorus is actually the one character I thought James Gunn could have gone, Suicide Squad-ish with it because Dr. Phosphorus obviously acts the villain. He is a villain. But then you actually, the genius of what he did was Phosphorus was made by a bigger villain. So, and hence, he's a victim.
Yeah.
So like,
yeah,
you still feel sorry for him. That's the amazing thing about Dr. Phosphorus is like,
I was dancing with him during his episode.
Yeah.
I mean, that was
every time he breaks out and dance, it's like the best scenes.
that isn't my favorite episode, but that might be one of my favorite scenes when Dr. Phosphorus, you show him how he completely just fell right into the villain role. When he turned into the phosphorus character, and he's just dancing with all the villains and the criminals, and then Batman appears at the. I mean, that episode is pretty fucking funny.
Oh my god, it's one of my favorite highlights of the film. Besides the tank scene where Phosphorus just comes out and saves the day, so to speak.
But that's the absurdity. Like there is and I'm talking about the philosophical notion of absurdity. There is an absurd notion that's embedded into Creature Commandos. It kind of goes hand in hand with a lot of monster stories. And the absurdity is that you have, like, what are we watching? Are we celebrating a guy's turn into an evil villain?
An evil villain.
Because the way it was framed was like celebratory.
Yeah.
But that's the moral ambiguity. And what is he actually saying? That's the point. We are left to wrestle with that question. What is James Gunn saying by framing this character in this way? And to me, that is the genius of this series, is that he's not looking to answer questions for you. You answer questions. You're the viewer. You interpret. I'm not here to tell you yes or no or good or bad. I am giving you a story. You decide. Here's the premise. here are the questions I'm posing.
Yeah, and you choose your side. Like everyone is allowed to actually say Dr. Phosphorus is evil, but then you have those moments where, but he may be evil, but he's also very sympathetic because like you have the scenes of him reminiscing about the child scene when he sees the little girl.
Yeah.
And he actually has a moment where he remembers his daughter. And it's like, you feel sorry for that guy because his whole origin was the fact that that crime boss killed his wife and daughter in front of him and blamed him and tried to actually blame it on him.
Yeah.
So he actually came to understand he would be blamed for the death of his own child and his wife.
And then you have G.I. Robot.
Oh my God, dude. I loved no Nazi is there's no good Nazi. I agree with G.I. Robot.
I mean, he was just an awesome character, and the types of existential like aspects that you can wrestle with a character like that is just absolutely in a lot of ways. When you create characters like these, if you know what you're doing in the writing room, it kind of writes itself.
You said you laughed at Dr. Phosphorus.
I did
a lot. I laughed at G.I. Robot.
Oh yeah, I did too. And then you have the Weasel, which David, oh man, this is hard for me to say because the Bride is probably my. I like the Bride a lot, meaning she is just a force to be reckoned with. She's an awesome she's an awesome leader for the series, meaning a way to move the story forward, using her as a bit of as a device to keep things coherent, to keep things aligned. And then of course you have Nina, who works at the emotional level in some regard, doing the same thing. But then you have a character like Weasel, and I think when it comes to just sheer emotion, I think he might be the saddest story. And in saying that, for me, it might be the strongest aspect of the story because you have a person who is clearly not bad.
Yeah.
This is probably the only person you can point to out of these characters where you can clearly say good and bad. He's clearly good.
Yeah.
But incredibly misunderstood.
Incredibly
Yes. Misunderstood. And to see that and how it's executed and brought forward on screen, and it touches you like emotionally, it's heart touching. Dude, I'm not gonna lie, man. Like when we learned his origin story, I got a little teary eyed.
It was heartbreaking.
Yeah,
it was legitimately heartbreaking because like it's the type of story that if you are a animal lover, you look at animals like how you look at Weasel.
Yeah.
And it breaks your heart. It really does. And there's a human nature in us where we feel empathy. I guess the word is empathy for those creatures or those beings that are not able to properly speak for themselves.
Speak in behalf of themselves.
Speak for the behalf of themselves. And in the end of the day, when you think about it, when you look at a creature's reactions to things, you have to take a big step back and you realize, oh, maybe that they were doing it because of this. Maybe they were doing it because of this. We don't know because they can't say.
Well, a story like this with Weasel, it really goes to show you that we don't always have all the facts. When we want to grab those pitchforks and we want to take someone to the town square and make them pay for whatever we think they did, it goes to show you that there's always two sides, at least when it comes to someone who's unable to communicate in behalf of themselves.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, that's an allegory for not just people with monstrous features or someone who might be misunderstood, but marginalized people in general. The fact that who fights for them, who fights for the voiceless, who fights for people who historically are not given a voice.
Yeah.
And that's why a character like that is just so impactful and powerful.
And And that type of character meshes so well with this team. And that's the thing I really like about Creature Commandos is the chemistry that each character gives off to the team. Like, just like you said, the Bride is the leader. Bride is the leader. And, you know, her narrative pushes everyone forward. But all the other characters mesh so well with each other that when they play off of each other, it feels natural and it makes you actually kind of get behind the characters more as a team. And this is something that I think is missing in a lot of superhero genre movies and films right now, where everyone tries to capture that Avengers type of moment, that Justice League type of moment. But they always forget that basically the team has to be relatable as a unit.
Yeah.
They have to be, you have to get behind them. Like how we got behind Guardians of the Galaxy. We got behind the Guardians because we all felt for each of those members, and each of those members meshed well with each other. Here in Creature Commandos, Gunn was able to actually tap into that again, but was able to make a team that honestly, at the end of it, everyone that has seen Creature Commandos has stated, we would want to see these characters in live action.
Yeah, well, we probably
see them
will.
more than the Justice League.
Yeah.
Because, like, who doesn't want to see the Bride and Dr. Phosphorus and Weasel and all of those characters come back again just to actually tell us a story? And that's even with the playoff, my favorite playoffs with the team is Weasel with Dr. Phosphorus, because Phosphorus looks at Weasel very confused throughout the entire series. Like he doesn't know what Weasel's doing, nor does he care. But he gets angry at Weasel whenever he does something. like whether it's peeing on him, and then that is the funny, the humor between the two characters reminds me of like Drax and Rocket, where it's like that type of chemistry, that type of bond. They're like going, oh, okay, all right, it's you. All right,
okay, so
do it.
you bring up Drax. The character that comes closest to him, even though he's very different, but you can definitely point to similarities, is the Frankenstein character.
Eric.
And David, I should have started the show this way, but I didn't, because I didn't want to get trapped into my own subjective desires and wants. That's not how I like to review things. But I will say, David, moving into Creature Commandos, one of my hesitations was, how are you going to characterize the Bride and Frankenstein? We've never, as far as I know, we've never seen Frankenstein in live action or in any real capacity in animation. There's a lot of movies out there I have not seen. I've seen a lot.
Where they've taken the liberties with the character.
Yes.
They haven't followed the tropes of Mary Shelley.
Okay. I'm talking about the Frankenstein character from DC.
Yes.
Like, and how they characterize him. I don't know. Have we seen him in DC animation?
Not in DC animation or in live action.
Yeah, I'm not talking about the actual Frankenstein from Mary Shelley. I'm talking about the DC's version of this character. I mean, I'm a Justice League Dark guy, so obviously there's that. He was part of the original JLD team.
But they never really did a story with him.
No, and even going further back, of course, several decades earlier, he's been around for a long time, but I was hesitantly optimistic about seeing what James Gunn would do with him, because I already had a definitive voice in my mind.
And yeah, that's the thing.
That's what, unfortunately, sometimes expectations can kill your response or reaction to a character. But for me, it was an unexpected surprise. And it goes to show you how sometimes if a showrunner or director subverts your expectations, that's not always a negative. The fact that he brought something very fresh and unique to the character that, in my opinion, worked and also was unique and very quite clever and funny.
And funny. That was the biggest thing.
Just truly funny with the fact that he is just completely unself-aware.
Yes.
Is so simply just perfectly comedic that it works when you just sprinkle it throughout your entire series.
And it's not that he's self-aware, by accident. He's self-aware by choice.
Not
Because
self-aware. No,
he's not self-aware.
I don't think I agree with that, David. I don't think he understands. I
Yeah.
think he does not understand.
But because, like, I'm sorry, the character that he played off really well with was Rick Flag. When he played,
Yeah, that was some of my best stuff,
the
my most
scenes-
favorite stuff.
the
Yeah.
scenes with him and Rick Flag, it's like you feel for Rick Flag. It's like, God damn it, dude, just do what he says. And it's like the best thing by far is like Frankenstein at one point is like, oh, I don't give a fuck.
Yeah.
And he just-
All I gotta say is that now that we've seen how well David Harbour, I believe that's how you say his name, played Frankenstein in Creature Commandos, I cannot wait, and we better
we better.
see a live action of this character in a movie. I know Frank Grillo had said that. I think he said that he has a part in Superman.
Him and what's the name of the actress? That Indira Varma, who plays the bride.
Mm-hmm.
They both have a upcoming role.
Okay, so we know obviously the Creature Commandos is a part of the ever evolving new DC universe. So
Yeah.
it would make sense that at some point we would see these characters in live action.
You want to see David Harbour?
And I'm glad that it's sooner than later, because I don't know if Superman is the right movie to do so. However, I'll wait to judge how that inclusion works. But ultimately, David, the tone, the music, the energy, and the atmosphere, we're talking a lot about characters, but even the energy. I guess you could say you had a true James Gunn signature style because you had the music. He is definitely a guy that likes to play with music. It plays a critical role in pretty much everything he does. And then also in Creature Commandos, it's very much par for the course. The use of bands like Gogol Bordello introduces a frenetic energy to some of the more chaotic scenes.
Well, it's the thing I really loved about that was, as a fan of Gogol Bordello since they formed in I think 2000, I've always liked their type of music because there's like, just like what you said, a frenetic energy that type of music brings. And with James Gunn's style, I think something like that frenetic energy works.
Well, so this is considered gypsy music, and my use of gypsy here, I know that's offensive to some nowadays. That is what the music
Is called.
is considered. It's a gypsy aesthetic.
It's a gypsy punk
In
rock.
fact, I believe the group themselves considered themselves gypsies.
Yes. And that's the big thing. They're a band that actually originated from Romania.
Yeah.
And, around that area, that type of music is treated like folk music. It just so
There you go.
happens. It just so happened that Gogol Bordello, when they formed, they took their folk music and they were big fans of the punk rock movement. So they wanted to bring the punk rock music into their folk music.
Yeah.
And hence you get gypsy rock.
So I like that you say folk music, David, because let's look at the nature of, well, first off, this music is where does it originate from?
Romania.
Okay. So we're dealing with goth horror or
Yep.
gothic horror. So if you look at the power or the origins of folk in general, folk stories, folk music, it's a way of describing folk culture, which is the aspect of sharing knowledge through stories, through music. No one owns it because you can repurpose it. So if you look at that, how brilliantly does that connect to the very nature of gothic horror and its connection to Romania and the fact that we're dealing with themes of nomadism and non-belonging?
Yeah.
Because we already know, how are gypsies characterized? As nomadic,
As nomadic.
and not belonging.
And that's what makes it really cool is like the idea that basically they took this band, and for those out there that want to know, the influences of Gogol Bordello actually comes from a writer from Ukraine named Nikolai Gogol. He served as ideological influence for the band because he smuggled Ukrainian culture into Russian culture, which Gogo Bordello intends to do with Romanian East European music, basically their folk music,
Yeah.
and into English-speaking world.
Yeah.
And like that's what gypsy culture is all about. It's about traveling around and basically picking things up and then bringing it over here.
And that translates over to folk culture.
Yes.
So when I say that Creature Commandos is in a lot of ways brilliant, this is what I'm talking about. When you want to chastise James Gunn for not being Snyder, I'm going to argue and say, yes, I like Snyder. He's an amazing visualist. His visuals are fucking top notch. And then you compare it to James Gunn's approach here. It's not just about visuals. There is so much going on beneath that may not even be overt to some, but it's there.
It's there.
And the impact is felt even if you don't fully comprehend or understand what's happening. And that's the difference between, let's say, a Creature Commandos and something that maybe Snyder would have done. There's a lot more intertextuality here that makes sense. I mean, it just works on so many levels, David. I can probably do a 3 or 4 hour discussion on the various episodes.
Oh yeah, no. I actually originally thought me and you it would have been fun to actually cover every single episode because there's so much going on with each character. We've only covered like the main core of Creature Command, the main group. We haven't touched on Rick Flag Sr.
Nope.
I mean, his story is freaking that's cool.
Yeah, he's good too.
And the fact that basically Gunn was able to take an element from Suicide Squad that he did, which means that in a creative way, Gunn is tying all those knots together to make his universe. And that's one of the biggest things about Creature Commandos that I took away with is Gunn set the table for his universe. He's like going, okay, this is what the universe you guys are jumping in. We're not gonna waste your time with giving everyone their own individual origin stories.
Yeah.
We're gonna focus on setting the table, making sure people understand this is how the world works, and giving you characters that you can get behind through not their origins, but through their actions.
Yeah. Creating that human connection.
The human connection.
Isn't that really what it's about? Creating human stories that people can relate to.
And I'm sorry, if you walk away from Creature Commandos and say, I cannot relate to any of these characters, something's wrong with you.
Yeah. I've seen
Something is
some
wrong with
complaints from some of the Snyder bros, and it just amazes me. Like you can love a director and still love what he does, like all his work, without immediately shitting on someone else who's
else's
doing it new, who's doing something different. I've never understood that ever. Have you ever been like that with anything, David, that you're into?
No. Honestly,
it's a strange behavior. It feels like you're less of a fan of the IP. Like, are you a DC fan or are you a Snyder fan? Because if you are a Snyder fan, you're not a fan of DC, then I understand the argument. Because it's clear, you're a Snyder fan, therefore you want Snyder to do everything.
But they want and the thing is, they try to mask it by saying they're DC fans because they like the interpretation of Snyder of these characters.
Well, listen, I'm not a stickler when it comes to those types of things, but one can argue that Snyder didn't really know what the fuck he was doing.
Exactly.
With Superman specifically.
And Batman.
I'm not saying anything to shame Snyder's take because, as I said before, I own those movies. I even bought the Snyder Cut, even though it's available on Max for free. But I bought it because I like those movies. But my point is that you could argue that there are so many issues with his characterizations of both Superman and Man of Steel. Now, we don't have a lot of time, so we'll probably form another conversation around this later. But I will say, David, as I had previewed at the top of the show, I don't know if this proves that James Gunn can continue to handle DC. This is a great project. But his take on Superman doesn't align, or I should say, Superman as an IP does not align with James Gunn's style.
Yeah.
His darker take on humanity, his existential despair that he dissects and explores through his characters, the rejection of society of these characters, or I should say the depiction of these characters being rejected by society. He did it in Guardians.
Yes.
He did it in Sliver. He did it in Creature Commandos, what we're talking about now. I don't know if that always works. You could say Superman has been rejected by society, but you're grasping at his style if you're going to just go to that.
Because Superman is more than just he represents an ideal of hope.
Yes, and even though there's a potential for existential transcendence in James Gunn's stories, I would argue there isn't necessarily optimism there.
Yes.
And his style and what he likes to write and dissect in terms of social commentary doesn't necessarily align well with Superman as an IP. So that question, whether or not James Gunn's Superman will be good, I don't think it's been answered yet with Creature Commandos.
No, I don't think it can till we actually see Superman the movie come out yet, because like unfortunately this ties into, and it delves into like a subject that me and you can go on and on about, what the characters, like what DC has always dealt with. There's a trope in comics where basically they always say the superhero, the character represents an ideal. You know,
Right.
Batman represents justice in the end. Superman represents hope. And when you're dealing with characters like that, it's I hate to say it, but there's very little writers that have been able to capture that in the cinematic sense, where it's kind of like the character doesn't actually, you know, just characterize that ideal. It's everything around him. His aura exudes it.
Yeah.
And like for James Gunn, I've always said in all the other shows that me and you have covered with DC, Superman is his biggest test as a filmmaker.
I agree.
Because I'm going to look at that. If he comes out and I'm not saying he has to knock it out the park and get 100 score on Superman. If he can come out and give us a decent adaptation of Superman as told by him,
Right.
then that will make me say James Gunn is one of the best filmmakers out there today.
Because also, David, there's an argument to be made that should a director break his auteur style?
Yeah.
I mean, because in order for him to make Superman work, and also maintain his own style, therefore, let me backtrack. If you're not going to use your style,
Yes.
then why direct the movie? Why make this a James Gunn Superman? You are marketing it by using your name. And with your name comes expectations. And those expectations don't necessarily equate to a good Superman story.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the way Superman's being marketed, it's being marketed as an ensemble cast.
It is.
That bothers me because we don't need a Superman ensemble cast. Now, I know James Gunn has come out and has tried to quell some of these concerns, and he has definitively said that there are lots of other characters in this movie because they are in this world. He said, but the story solely focuses on Superman, Lois, and Lex.
And if that's the case, kudos.
Yeah.
Because like that's the thing is like at the end of the day, this will be a far different James Gunn film than we have ever seen him ever produce. And going to like what you were saying about, you know, should an auteur break his style? In a lot of ways, I've always been on the side that don't break your style because you're going to end up not being an auteur.
Mm-hmm.
But nowadays, dude, after me and you have discussed about this off and on in other shows that we have done, I'm beginning to think, no, as an auteur, you should challenge your style. Because think about it. Some of our greatest filmmakers in history, we don't really characterize what is their style. Like, say, for example, Steven Spielberg. Spielberg broke his style. A lot of people say his style is very ambiguous.
He's just spectacle.
Spectacle.
I don't know if he has a I mean,
and he doesn't have a definitive style.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, what? Then you look at like Alfred Hitchcock. Hitchcock, there are tropes, but is it a style? There's not necessarily a style you focus with him, especially with some of his great masterpieces.
I don't know. I think that's probably worth a longer discussion, but I get your point.
But that's what I mean is like, if James Gunn's able to actually do this with Superman, he can enter that upper echelon of filmmakers. That's the thing that has me excited.
See, moving forward, David, just using what we know of James Gunn's work, specifically now with Creature Commandos, I have faith that he can handle DC at large, meaning I think he can be the managerial role. I've never doubted that. I do believe he can probably run this company effectively. But again, the question remains, okay, but Superman is very different. So we'll see, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to jump on this train of just talking trash before we have a chance to actually evaluate what he's done. But to close out today's show, I guess you can call James Gunn's Creature Commandos a gothic yet accessible start to the DC universe.
Absolutely.
Creature Commandos stands as an ode to both gothic horror and Gunn's storytelling sensibilities. While it may not have the narrative ambition of other DC properties, I mean, it being an animation, 7 episodes in length on Max, its emphasis on character development and its respectful treatment of classic monster tropes offer a distinct and satisfying experience. And I'm going to say that that's a good thing. In this temporary or contemporary climate, in terms of movie making, we need to have directors that don't need the large spectacle in order to make a movie interesting to watch, because DC at this point can't really compete budgetary wise. Marvel can't compete with Marvel right now.
Yes.
But my point, what I was trying to say, is that DC can't really compete budget wise with Marvel, because Marvel has, well, they did have their game plan set. DC has to start small again.
Yes.
And even when they start to get big, they need to have those moments where they can bring it back. And the only way, after going big, can you sell something small is through very detailed characterization.
Yes.
That's the only way. So the fact that we have a director, producer, writer who's in charge of DC moving forward, who actually knows how to do this, I feel like we're going to have a lot more attention on character development, which is key. All right, David, your final thoughts?
My final thoughts on this is I really think that it took me a while to think about this, but I do think that this is the best animation series DC has produced in a very long time. When it comes to their animation series as a whole, and I know that there's a lot of great animations in DC's history, but this is the best, I think, because
what about Justice League Dark Apocalypse?
I wanted to see Trigon actually envelop Superman's body again.
I'm going to make a whole movie and then at the end make it not matter any of it.
Anyway, Flashpoint. But
Fucking cop out.
But that's the thing that I really do like about Creature Commandos is James Gunn used this as the springboard for his story arc. And it's a heck of a springboard, because now not only am I excited for what's next for the Creature Commandos, but I'm excited to see what else is in James Gunn's DC world. It makes me want to go see Superman. It makes me more anticipated for, okay, let's see what happens with Batman Brave and the Bold and Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow. Let's see that, because if it's led by James Gunn and he is giving us this overall story arc of gods and monsters, okay, let's see what the DC universe looks underneath his tutelage. It's not going to be Zack Snyder. We all
Did
know
you say
this.
Snack Snyder?
Snack Snyder.
Is he a snack for you?
But I'm not going to say it's under like that. It's not under his control anymore. It's now under James Gunn's control. So this is another person's interpretation of the DC
His wife
universe.
calls him Snack Snyder.
Snack Snyder.
You a Snack Snyder. Come here. Come here, you. It's so stupid. All right, David. We didn't give it percentages, did we?
Oh, wait.
You know what? I'm going to give it a 90.
I'm giving this a 95.
Okay.
Because it is like the best, one of the best DC animations I've seen in a
It's
long
a good
time.
start, and it definitely filled me with more confidence in the future of DC. But that can quickly be stomped out.
Like Dr. Phosphorus sticking his hand through your face.
Yeah, we could be dancing and celebrating. Yeah, we're happy that James Gunn's doing this. This is great. And then suddenly Batman shows up and the party's over.
That party's over. Oh my
right.
God, that could actually happen.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Bye-bye.